From Republic to Empire. The objectives are: characterize the internal instability of the Roman Empire, and second, summarize the event in which Octavian, titled Caesar Augustus, was named emperor. Now, the context in which we see the rise of this Roman Empire: they had conquered the surrounding territories, and while they were a republic technically, they had, of course, risen to empire, dominating the regions that belonged to other people originally. What we begin to see, though, is tensions of inequality and unrest that begin to emerge, not just between the plebeians and patricians, which had existed there before, but what this looked like in an imperial context. The Senate had become the real governing body, of course, and the Senate directed the wars of the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE. Both foreign and domestic policy were shaped by these senators, which again, remember, had initially been only those patricians. Now, the political offices were increasingly controlled by a small circle of wealthy and powerful families. Over time, this republic was transforming into what seemed more like an oligarchy. That is, certain families sharing all of the majority of the power. Now, what became the sort of expectation through this is that a tyranny or a monarchy might emerge through this shift. Now then, the major backbone of the Roman state and army had always been the small farmers, those who produced the life source, the food, the major backbone of the economy in general, all by these small farmers, not these huge landed estates, not the aristocracy, but the average person. But many of them had become the landless poor. Over time, we see the ultra-rich, the aristocracy gobbling up more territory, more land, and you have more and more people pushed into a context in which they're even considered, in an ancient sense, not even citizens. Now, many felt that this needed to change. Now, whether for political ambition and or true belief, we see champions of the people emerge. Now, two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, the Gracchi brothers, believed that the basic cause of Rome's problem was this decline in the landed estates of the average farmer. Now, they championed the average person, but the context in which this arose was that they then became increasingly popular with the landless poor now. The problem, however, is that they were increasingly unpopular with the true aristocratic powers. And so the question became, are these people trying to use the popular opinion and the popular democratic even kind of sensibilities of the average person to try to seize power for themselves? This, of course, at least is the idea behind the tensions that the elite and the aristocracy had against these people. They took power and land from the wealthy to give to the poor, and the senators, of course, freaked out, and they assassinated the brothers as those who posed or fancied themselves as monarchs and tyrants. Now, of course, the Senate is going to follow a similar pattern through these various tensions. And a new role in the army arose in the rule of Marius. In 107 BCE, the Roman general Marius became consul and began to recruit for his army. Now, in the past, the army was only restricted to those who were landed people and Romans. However, Marius recruited volunteers from the urban and rural poor who owned no property at all, and he promised them land in return for their loyalty and for their work. Now, what's here is interesting is that first, this expanded his power base, expanded his power through the average soldier, which translates into real power. and these people pledged an oath of loyalty to the general, but not necessarily to the government and to the Senate and the senators. So this made Marius a very powerful man, backed by a massive army that was loyal to this man and his promise of new territory. Now, this new system of military recruitment placed power in the hands of generals hereforward. And this became a pattern that becomes problematic as we move forward. Lucius Cornelius Sulla waged war in Asia Minor, and he was a council of the plebs and tried to transfer power to Marius, but it occurred a civil war through this tension, through these conflicts. Both had massive armies now and were at each other. Now, Sulla ultimately won and seized power in Rome in 82 BCE and restored power to the Senate, fighting back against Marius. Now, this bloodshed, of course, was dramatic and will be remembered in long ages forward in the Roman Empire as a massive bloodletting of political enemies. Now, we see the full collapse of the Republic in the years that would follow after this. We see a massive explosion of civil wars in general from 82 to 31 BCE. The first triumvirate, first three grouping, that's what the triumvirate is. It's a grouping of three that shared power, arose, and conflict kind of permeated between these three on who would control. Crassus was a rich Roman citizen. Pompey was a one who had a massive army and commanded in Spain and had also great wealth. And Julius Caesar, the most famous, who also commanded in Spain. And this triumvirate was, in a sense, equal between the three people. Now, Crassus took command in Syria, Pompey in Spain, and Caesar in Gaul. And this became kind of the division here as they both marched off into their regions. Now, what transpired here then is the kind of lucrative outcomings of their region. Pompey in Spain had been picked for a long time, but Gaul was untouched territory that Caesar could dominate and bring back great wealth. So Caesar was ultimately asked to lay down his command when Crassus died in 53 BCE. Now Caesar felt that his wealth, his power, was being unjustly taken from him. And whatever his political ambitions, he decided to break the law and march with his troops across the Rubicon and down into Rome with his soldiers. Now this was against the law. This was a clear violation of the law, and in many people's minds, they saw again the conflict between Sulla and his rival, and with the massive bloodletting that had occurred in Rome. Now, Caesar took power, but gave land to the poor and increased the Senate to 900 members, and in 44 BCE was ultimately assassinated. Now, it's unclear whether Caesar intended to set himself up as a monarch, which is what the accusers, the senators, really argued was the case, or whether he was genuinely trying to fix the system, or both. It's unclear to be sure. What seems clear is that he increased the Senate to 900 people so that he could dilute the voices of those that opposed him. In either case, he was assassinated, and many historians have speculated and written a great deal on this controversial topic. Of course, we could talk endlessly about this issue, but in terms of a survey class, there's just not the time. Now, the second triumvirate emerged in the wake of Caesar's assassination. Three men inevitably rose to new power. Octavian, which was Caesar's nephew. Antony, Marcus Antony, he was the an assistant and a sort of companion of Caesar's, and much of Caesar's army transferred to him, and Lepidus. Now, he was kind of a puppet man. I mean, he didn't really hold that much power. So the question became, who was going to be the commander of Caesar's cavalry? These men divided the authority and the wealth that Caesar had established. Now, Octavian, of course, took the west, and inevitably Antony took the east. And so we see inevitably a kind of division or stalemate between Octavian and Antony, which was similar to the case with Pompey and with Caesar. Now, Antony allied himself with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra VII, whom supposedly had a son by Caesar, which was a sort of clinging on to some authority and connection to Caesar's kind of lineage and authority. Whatever the case might be, all was settled at the Battle of Actium in Greece in 31 BCE, when Octavian's forces destroyed Antony's forces. So Cleopatra and Antony committed suicide together in the wake of this utter collapse of their authority. And now Octavian was the uncontested ruler of these soldiers and of the political authority. Now, people, of course, were nervous when he marched back to Rome. Would he set himself up as a monarch was the question. Now, in 27 BC, Octavian proclaimed the restoration of the Republic, in which he released the authority back to the people. Now, whether this was symbolic or a true release back to the Senate, we'll never know. Many historians have written about this. So he gave power back to the Senate, but they insisted that he be awarded the title Augustus, which means revered one, and that he remained the imperator for life, that is, one who controls the military. And so here we see, whether through political stratagem or true, care for the people, we see that the now Augustus has a huge position within the Roman Empire and seems to be grooming his family toward true authority and even monarchical authority and running the empire. He maintained a standing army of 28 legions, which each legion was a unit of 5,000. And auxiliary forces, 130,000, and the Praetorian Guard, which was a new development in which they specifically protected Augustus and the emperor in later time. Now here, of course, you might see the answer to the problem with Caesar and other assassinations in the past. With the Praetorian Guard now, he had people loyal to him that protected him from assassinations. Now, he failed in an attempt to conquer Germany, which was, in some sense, perhaps, an attempt to gain the same kind of glory that Caesar had in Gaul. But Germany provided all sorts of other problems that had not presented itself with Gaul, largely geographical questions, and new tribes in there that were much more fierce and resistant. Now, 3 legions under Varus were massacred by German warriors, which really broke the willpower of Augustus and became a kind of haunting spectrum of future emperors on the will to conquer the German territories. Largely, after that, the policy became maintaining the boundaries of the existing empire. Now, the early empire, then, was a succession of Augustus's family through adoption or through bloodline. Now, Augustus's new political system allowed the emperor to select his successor from his natural adopted family. Now, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, they all followed Augustus and increased in power, taking authority from the Senate gradually over time. So it wasn't that Augustus suddenly was some kind of massive monarch that had all authority. There began a tradition in which the imperator powers that had been given to Augustus for life would transfer to those whom he selected within his family. And here we see then the tradition of Caesars running the military. Now, Ultimately, however, with increasing speculation on each one of these kind of failed emperors, even over time, Nero had gone, it seems, too far for many's taste in terms of being enamored with having a Caesar, a true Caesar, at the helm of the empire. A revolt emerged against Nero. For various reasons, he was much hated by many of the people. Perhaps for the burning of Rome, perhaps for the fact that he had notorious blunders militarily, perhaps that he just fancied himself a musician and an athlete rather than an emperor. Whatever the case may be, this led to total military collapse and the transition of a new family. Now, there were, of course, the 5 good emperors that are referred to. Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius, Marcus Aurelius, all of these emperors that kind of dominated, including the Flavian family, into the 2nd century. But what seems clear during this time, the 2nd century CE, is a Pax Romana had settled for 100 years in the Roman Empire. That is, Roman peace. This is external peace and a state-funded projects throughout the empire, education, aqueducts, bridges, all of these sorts of innovations that made people's lives easier and made the kind of idea of the glory of Rome more palpable and true for many people. Many of these projects that were established during this period are those that remain standing today. A perfect example of this would be Hadrian's Wall in northern England, which was meant to protect the Roman territories. So the Pax Romana that had emerged was part of what was considered these 5 good emperors, at least good for the upper echelon of the Roman people. Certainly the poor, it was not good times. Now, the extent of the empire, as it grew and tried to maintain its borders, was always problematic. Trajan had extended Roman rule into Dacia, which is modern-day Romania, Mesopotamia, and the Sinai Peninsula. But the question was whether it could be maintained. Hadrian, of course, withdrew Roman forces from much of Mesopotamia and strengthened the fortifications and defensive walls along a line connecting the Rhine and the Danube rivers and England to keep out the Picts and the Scots, the various barbarians that wanted to make incursions into the Roman Empire. So the question became not whether expansion could be maintained, because it seemed that it could not, but whether the actual empire that had existed up to this point could be maintained in the long run. Now, there were, of course, various economic and social questions and concerns that had changed over time as well. Internal peace from the Pax Romana led to high levels of trade, which means economic boom. We have trade that went beyond the Roman frontiers, and we see the interconnectedness even from China to Rome with the Silk Road and Silk Road network. I mean, silk was a luxury that certainly the Romans wanted to consume, particularly, of course, we're talking about the wealthy elite. Farming, of course, remained also the chief occupation of many people, but we see a transition, not from the small territories controlled by, average people, but large farming estates called latifundiae. So the latifundia was a large farming estate, kind of like a plantation in an ancient Roman kind of sense. And this, of course, is the major shift that began to dominate in Roman farming. The sort of plantation model dominated, of course, by the wealthy who owned this sort of latifundiae model. Now, upper classes lived lives of leisure and luxury in villas, these latifundiae and various villas all over the place. The luxury of silk and luxurious goods like wine and oils and delicate foods. This was the kind of lives that the upper elite lived. However, the small farmers still became dependent on the larger farming lands owned by the wealthy, and we see this aristocratic tradition still dominating. And so this sort of structure will inevitably kind of be the foreshadowing and also the kind of morphing into the medieval manorial system, as we'll see, that these latifundii over time morph into the manorial system, to the feudal structure, the territory owned by the upper elite, and that the lower classes farm these lands owned by the wealthy. So the objectives in this reviewing the early empire was, first, characterize the internal instability of the Roman Empire, usually that conflict that occurred between the peoples and the tensions over who would control the empire. And of course, you still have economic tensions, you have the poor and rich kind of tensions, you have all of these sorts of tensions that translate into political power and to who would fix the economic problems. Second, summarize the event in which Octavian, titled Caesar Augustus, was named emperor. That is, the transition of authority of Caesar, inevitably Octavian, seizing control, and how that transitioned into empire through the imperator powers.